and is also available from the Secretariat. For the Hansard record, could you please each state your full name and the capacity in which you appear? We might start at this side of the room.
Tim Reardon, Chief Economist, Housing Industry Association.
Thank you, Mr Reardon.
Jocelyn Martin, Managing Director, Housing Industry Association.
Thank you, Mrs Martin.
Shaun Schmitke, I'm the Deputy CEO and National Director of Workplace Safety and Contracts Policy at Master Builders Australia.
Thank you, Mr Schmitke. That's a very long title. Have any of you got an opening statement for the committee?
Yes. Lead off if you like. Yep. Okay. Good morning and thank you for the opportunity to appear at the committee. HIA represents the interests of the residential building industry with a membership of over 60,000 across the country. We represent builders in all states and territories, small, medium, large volume home builders, as well as those specialising in renovations and additions. We also represent manufacturers and suppliers of building products and related building professionals, including engineers, surveyors, designers and their staff. As you will be aware, HIA have been invited to provide input to this inquiry in response to the activities of the CFMEU. However, we are aware that this inquiry has been ongoing for some time and has released 2 interim reports. Each of these reports makes recommendations and observations about housing and housing affordability, with HIA is broadly supportive of. And I guess we want to particularly recognise the recommendations out of the second interim report that recognises the impost of policy regulation on small to medium businesses. We consider the challenge against the 2 different segments of home building which are quite distinct, and the first is the detached home market and the apartment market. Detached home building is currently at the bottom of the cycle and caused by a rise in the cash rate, and we anticipate the number of homes commencing construction will slowly increase from this point in time forward. But activity will remain constrained as governments continue to add tax and costs to home building. Detached home building is, however, extremely efficient at delivering homes to the market. It's largely a subcontractor workforce that are paid for the completion of a task, not by the hour, which makes it one of the most, if not the most, efficient in the world. The constraints on productivity improvement in this sector are just imposed by government regulation at all tiers. The apartment market also remains at the bottom of the cycle, with around half of the number of homes under construction now compared to 2016. The decline in apartment construction is a direct consequence of government policies designed to slow apartment construction. This coordinated effort of the Australian and state government has been successful, and we now have an acute shortage of housing. Just as it's taken governments 20 years to constrain supply, it's likely to take decades to restore it back to the market. There is no silver bullet, and as your recommendations indicate, reforms to government policy are needed at all levels of government. This includes taking action to address the business and regulatory environment that has allowed the conduct of the CFMEU to persist for decades. I would like to take this opportunity to reinforce 5-fold impact actions of the CFMEU are having on housing affordability. It undermines confidence in the sector, a sector already bearing the brunt of current monetary policy. It acts as a strong disincentive to enter the industry, increasing competition for workers and adding to labour costs. It jeopardised taxpayers' dollars through government and infrastructure projects that cannot prioritise value for money. It jeopardises productivity, simply increasing the cost of doing business. Our submission also provides detail on how the housing industry has largely avoided union activity, which has been through the use of independent contracting. Despite this, our sector is feeling the impacts and activities of the CFMEU, whether that is directly through being involved in commercial, multi-unit or government-funded work, or indirectly through increasing costs as a result, for example, competing for labour with the entire industry and the broader economy suffering the consequences. Thank you. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms Martin. Mr Schmitke, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Senator. And as always, Master Builders Australia is grateful for the opportunity to appear today and assist the committee with this inquiry. The committee is aware that we have previously filed submissions at an earlier stage in this inquiry, and like the HIA, we've been invited to provide particular information with respect to the impact of the activities of the CFMEU on the cost of construction. It is to that topic that I'd seek to direct my comments today. particularly in relation to my background in industrial relations. Now, I wish to record my apologies at the outset for not filing a written submission, which I had intended to do before appearing today. The reason for that is that I've been overtaken by events dominating the debate in the Senate. Obviously, that's a very important issue for our industry and our members, but I will provide a written submission as soon as I can. I thought the best way I could assist the inquiry today and assist the committee is to just talk through 3 or 4 key points that I'd like to make. I'm happy to expand on them and provide further detail in our written submission. The first point I would make is that there is no doubt in Master Builder's mind that the CFMEU and its activities have driven up the cost of construction. The circumstances under which this occurs are wide and varied, but effectively we would say it's about the CFMEU misusing and exploiting their rights as a union to force builders to sign patent agreements. Those patent agreements contain a range of provisions which are designed to allow the CFMEU to wield control or influence over the sector, funnel money back to the CFMEU through various means, or create other restrictive practices which have no place in a modern industry like construction. I would be happy to provide the committee with some examples, real-life examples of particular clauses in those patent agreements which are live right now that builders are being faced with at the moment and pressured to sign. And obviously I'll also like to take you through the practical effects of those clauses and what it means for the cost of construction. Second key area I'd like to touch upon would really be to note that not only are the costs arising from this borne by the taxpayer, governments, the community, the clients, etc., but they have ripple effects throughout the rest of the industry and, in fact, the broader economy, all of which we would say add pressure to the cost of living. And again, I'd be happy to take you through the wide range of ways in which these ripple effects manifest. The third key point I'd like to make today is that my evidence will probably come as no surprise to you in terms of the impact of the CFMEU on in the building and construction industry, because their conduct and that union has been the subject of much earlier inquiry and reporting. We've had dozens of government reports, specific reviews and inquiries. We've got hundreds of federal court judgments, and we've had 4 separate Royal Commissions of Inquiry. We've had the Winnicke Royal Commission in 1982, the Giles Royal Commission in 1993, the Cole Royal Commission in 2003, Hayden Royal Commission in 2015. The combined total length of those reports from those Royal Commissions is 11,566 pages long, which is almost roughly exactly 10 times longer than Tolstoy's War and Peace. Now, I'm going to save you the trouble of reading those Royal Commission reports, although I do commend them to you, but I would be happy to expand upon their common findings, key of which is that in the building and construction industry there is a long-standing, ingrained poor culture underpinned by a widespread disregard for the law. I'd be keen to unpack what drives that culture, what it means, and how that culture allows corruption and criminality to flourish. And that brings me to the fourth area, which obviously will touch upon the government's moves, recent moves to clean up the CFMEU and weed out criminal and corrupt behaviour from our industry. The committee will know that Master Builders Australia strongly supports the moves of the government in this regard. We have been calling and doing our best to ensure that the bill before the Senate at the moment regarding the administration of the CFMEU can pass, and passed swiftly. There is absolutely no doubt that our industry is under pressure, and that pressure is growing, and that bill needs to be passed. Unlike previous attempts where governments have made change in this area, had Royal Commissions, the union tends to perhaps reduce its activities, but I can tell you in this situation they're not. They are becoming worse, and it's worsening by the day. The pressure continues. They are not backing off, and the longer that the bill is delayed, the greater the concern amongst industry participants, and the bigger the pressure that is mounting. So we obviously want that bill passed, but I would also say this. The passage of that bill and the placing of the CFMEU into administration is not the be-all and end-all to fix the problems that exist in the building and construction industry. In fact, Yes, it's a strong first step, but it is a first step. There's two other important steps that need to occur in order to drive genuine, meaningful, lasting, tangible change in the building and construction industry. The first would be to make sure that businesses who put their hand up and cooperate with regulators over the coming period can do so in a way where they're going to be free from repercussions and reprisals, which we know will happen if they're not protected. But the second area is that the government needs to consider, and both parties need to consider, a range of changes to the law which are industry-specific, that target all of the causes and drivers that give rise to the culture in our industry, because it's that culture which allows the corruption and criminality to flourish. And unless you tackle them, the criminality and the corruption will always exist. We know this, and I can say with 100% confidence that unless these measures are taken, then the current process and the current bill before the Senate will make absolutely no difference in the long term. And I say that because of history. We've had 4 previous Royal Commissions, various measures implemented to fix this issue, and they haven't worked. And in fact, it's resulted in the problems reoccurring and getting worse. This is a unique opportunity where we can actually put in place some decent, lasting, tangible law reform that will deliver positive cultural change to our industry and effectively solve the problems that we all know exist in the building and construction industry and have existed for decades. This is a great opportunity. Now, in doing that, I would indicate that master builders have thought long and hard about what that law reform looks like. So I'd be happy to table with the committee today a response and options for the government to consider and the opposition. And in fact, by submitting this document, I would encourage the committee to give consideration to recommending that the measures outlined in the document be pursued by government and adopted by the parliament as a high priority. And the reason we say that is that if you make lasting cultural change in our industry, it is a big industry. It is a very big industry. 1.3 million people directly employed, 440,000 business entities in building and construction. 98% of those are SMEs. In fact, we have more small businesses in the building and construction industry than any other sector of the Australian economy. We're 9% of employment, over 10% of GDP. We do work to the value of in excess of $260 billion each year, so it's a significant sector. Small changes result in big differences, and a positive cultural change in our industry will deliver not only for our industry and our members, but also for the broader community and the greater Australian economy. The other thing I want to say is this. Master Builders Australia is the oldest industry association in Australian history. We were the very first union of employers to be registered under industrial laws back in, I think, 1848 in New South Wales as a registered organisation. Our New South Wales office has a certificate number 1 as a registered organisation. I say that because it demonstrates that we understand and appreciate industrial relations laws. We understand and appreciate the importance in the economy that they play, and we understand and appreciate that unions also play an important role in that system. Master Builders is not against unions in any way, shape or form. What we want in the building and construction industry are good unions that are responsible, that look after the interests of their members and act like 99.9% of all other unions act like, where they can achieve outcomes for their members in a way which complies with workplace laws. That is all we're seeking. And in fact, I'm aware, if I'm to look at Senator Grogan and Sterle, I have worked with your unions in the past. I think it was the MISO back in the day, and certainly with the Transport Workers Union in New South Wales, and they are good and decent unions. The people there aren't out breaking the law. You can do deals with them, you can come to understandings, they're sensible, they understand how the law works. The CFMEU is completely different, completely different. We do not want a union like that in our sector, but we do want good, responsible unions in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Schmitke, and I just want to make sure that everyone's happy to have that document tabled officially, thank you. It is 26 pages long, so I won't ask you to go through all of it, and we will take a little bit of time to digest it, but it does look like there's some very interesting suggestions in here. I just want to go back before I ask a couple of questions to you specifically about that, to the issue around insolvencies that we're seeing, and particularly around small businesses, small construction businesses. It's reported that the construction sector has the highest number of insolvencies at the moment, and in the 12 months to June, it was around 2,975 was the number that I had, which was 34.4% more than its previous record of 2,213 that was set in 2023. What, if you could name 3, 4, 5 things off the top of your head, are the drivers of this excessive number of insolvencies in the building and construction sector?
So in that data there are two things at play. The first is a data shadow from a problem the building industry had, particularly 2021, 2022. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing now is a number of businesses that are being wound up at the end of that cycle. That cycle was the fixed price contract, rapid increase in material prices, led to a number of builders experiencing cash flow problems. And we've seen a number of builders exit. That data typically turns up at the end of the financial year. So again, I expect that we probably haven't quite seen the peak of this year. That typically turns up in August data. There's a consistent pattern that of firms being wound up just at the end of the financial year. But from an industry perspective, we're through that cycle. We're now at the trough in a cycle, so we're on the ground experiencing a significantly lower volume of insolvency at the moment, or cash flow problems, than what we've seen in recent years. What's the second component to that data that's turning up is the subcontractor component to the industry. So whilst the initial cash flow problem is experienced by the builder to customer relationship, what we're seeing now is that flow through is being experienced by subcontractors. So as the volume of building activity has slowed, that impact has now flowed through to subcontractors, and that is less of a challenge from a government perspective because it is a business to business relationship. It is not a business to consumer challenge, and so builders are accustomed to managing cash flow challenges amongst their subcontractors, and there are perhaps a few that have adjusted their expenditure patterns through the upcycle and are now adjusting their expenditure patterns back on the bottom of the scale. So largely a data challenge there, and an issue that will be resolved with time as the industry cycles through that.
Can I ask about the implications of small business failures in the construction sector? One of the pieces of evidence that I've heard, and I can't remember whether it was on the record in this committee or in conversations with the constituents, but is that people are very nervous about employing a builder, particularly a small builder, because they're seeing this pattern of insolvencies, and they're worried that if there are sunk costs that they might lose their money and still not get their building work done.
Yeah, that's certainly a concern. Market confidence is low as a consequence of that. And so what we're seeing at the moment, and certainly trying to push our members towards, is what's known as spec homes in the industry, where they build a home and then make it for sale. Almost 100% of homes sold over the course of the past 5 years were sold and then built. And at the moment, if you were to have a completed home, demand is high, but consumers don't want to take on that risk. And as a consequence, we're certainly hopeful that as an industry, and particularly the larger players, will shift to building spec homes, complete those homes and make them available to market as a means of managing that lower level of consumer confidence in the industry at the moment.
Can I just point of time? Is that okay? When you say that, are you talking about sort of purchasing off the plan type scenarios?
So almost 100% of homes built in Australia are sold that way, sold off the plan and then built. And prior to the acute shortage that we have at the moment, if we go back 20 years, would be 20 to 30% of homes would be built and then sold, so not the off the plan option. And we're hopeful that in this cycle, builders will have the sufficient cash reserves to be able to build homes to keep that workforce actively engaged and deliver those homes to market, then sell them, rather than the other way around.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's right. Is there a policy setting or something that you're looking for from government, whether it be state or federal, that would allow for that change in behaviour?
The cause of the problem was the boom-bust cycle that the industry has been on, whether that is from fiscal settings, from interest rates and from population settings. All three of them we've cycled through the industry quite significantly, with the highest level of building activity and now the lowest level for more than a decade. The answer would be stable and consistent policy settings.
Okay. Ms Martin, you said it looked like you had something to add.
I was just going to add, particularly around the small business, I think that one of the things that we witnessed during the pandemic, of course, because of labour shortages and high material prices, was a blowout in the build times, which meant that with a fixed price contract, they were unable to sort of claw back those changes. Of course, now they're able to price better. Material prices have levelled off. They're at a higher rate, but they've levelled off. Skilled labour is still short, but they are able to plan ahead a little bit more for that. We are seeing build times come back to a not as short as pre-COVID, but certainly going in the right direction. Which means that the builder is not underwriting the risk for as long when they're building the home. Yeah.
Labour shortages, I do want to come to that because I think this is an important feature. I'm a Victorian senator, and one of the anecdotal stories that I have heard is that it's impossible to get a builder to do house building or even home repairs because everyone's gone to work for the big build in Victoria that is well paid and there's work is plentiful, but it is a disruption caused by government policy. Is that experience either shared around the country, or is it something that you have heard in your industry body?
There is certainly significant competition from other industry sectors for employing subcontractors that are carpenters, electricians and all those skilled trades at the base of our industry. We have had that from the mining industry for a number of years, and at the moment, yes, there is a boom in construction activity which is absorbing any excess labour that there might be from residential home building. It is in part a consequence of a 4% unemployment rate and an economy that is very low levels of unemployment and very low levels of access to unskilled labour. But the other component for us is with very large population growth at the moment that we are unable to access skilled labour from overseas, and that means that it would be beneficial for the industry to be able to access that labour as we go through boom and bust cycles, and particularly on the peak of those cycles to be able to access labour from overseas, skilled tradespeople that is, to be able to accommodate the demand when we go through those up cycles. That is certainly not a replacement for training domestic labour, and the industry does have an ongoing task there in ensuring they attract enough apprentices to the industry to sustain that level of activity.
And is that an issue? Do you specify to the Immigration Minister in your advocacy specific skill sets where you're seeing the shortages?
Yes.
And what are
definitely,
they?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have a publication, happy to share that with you. We report quarterly on skilled trade shortages. They were at their most acute on record in the 25 years of that survey during the pandemic. They remain more acute now than what they were at any stage prior to the pandemic, although they have eased. There's really only two markets that would be regional Victoria and Western Sydney, where there is an excess of skilled trades in the building industry at the moment. They're two markets that have slowed particularly quickly. But there are other markets that remain, essentially everywhere else in the country remains at short supply.
And is it broadly across all the trades,
all
or is
trades, Yeah, no, it's all skilled trades. And as we went through the pandemic, there were, we could see particular trades, typically we would see prices increase by 1 or 2% per year. During, say, September quarter last year, we saw prices for plasterers increase by 23% in the quarter alone, and that was a reflection of the bundle of work that was arriving at completion. That trade was a completion trade. Homes are coming to the end of their cycle. Also at a time when there was a number of government projects around the country that were in high demand or demanding carpentry trades. And we saw universally every region, every builder in the country reporting an extraordinary increase in that particular trade. For every other trade, they went through that cycle, that 20 to 30% increase at some stage, and we saw a structural shift up. It wasn't that there was a shift of labour from detached home building to apartments or from detached home building to mining or government. It is simply the fear of the loss of those skilled trades that's driven those price increases. A good example was the storm damage in 2019, so pre-pandemic storm damage southeast corner of Queensland. saw a significant increase in demand for roof plumbers, and it took 2 weeks for a 30% increase in roof plumbers in Queensland to flow through to the impact of roof plumbers in Melbourne. No trades shifted from Melbourne to SEQ, but the increase in price transferred through.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Schmitke, I want to mention the big build to you, and again, as a Victorian, one of the things that the master builders have said is that the cost of building for Victorians or for Australians has gone up by around 30%. Again, anecdotally, we here in Victoria, that's probably around 50% because of that shift to government projects as opposed to private sector projects. Is that something that that you have heard too, or?
Oh yes, yes, no, absolutely right. There is a big difference for our industry when it's working for government versus when it's working for a private investor or doing private work that's privately funded. As soon as you have a government element, two things happen. The first is that it seems that the cost of that particular job is treated as something where it doesn't really matter how much it's going to cost, somebody's paying for it. Therefore, we can price it at whatever we need to price it at because we know that there's always going to be somebody to pay that bill. Now, I don't say that in the context of our members gouging. It's more that you then have a range of difficult and additional procurement obligations that you're required to comply with, which impose a range of additional costs and risks on builders. And the state governments and territory governments too, I should say, often have procurement rules which force our members to adopt particular practices which they ordinarily wouldn't adopt.
Like what?
In order to get the work. So,
what sort of practices?
Well, if, for example, in Queensland, if I was to tender for state government-funded work in Queensland, I would be required to comply with their best practice industry conditions, which is a basic procurement principle document. That particular document used to say, until recently, that in order to demonstrate best practice, you needed to make best endeavours to have best practice enterprise arrangements in your workplaces. Now it says that you need to have an enterprise agreement with the CFMEU in order to get that work. Worse, it also says that regardless of whether it's construction work in things like schools and hospitals or whether it's more civil infrastructure, you still have to do the deal with the CFMEU. So there's no AWU there. In fact, through that procurement policy, they've written the AWU out of the industry in Queensland quite effectively. So that particular obligation means that our members in that state are forced into doing a deal with the CFMEU, and of course they have no bargaining power there because the CFMEU go, here's your patent agreement, you need this in order to be eligible to tender for the work, and if you don't comply, well, that's fine, we'll give it to somebody else. And I can tell you, Senator, and this is going to sound outrageous, but this is true. I've had this numerous times, and I'm sure as we go forward over the next few months, people will be able to come out forward and give evidence to this effect. But literally, the CFMEU will go to a builder and say, here is the document, here's the agreement, we've already signed it. All you need to do is sign it, we'll get it across the line. So don't worry about anything, you just need to sign here. They even, at some point, have asked our members for money. So if you want a copy of the agreement, you need to come to us and you've got to pay us to get a copy of the agreement. And moreover, the cost of filing and getting it through the Fair Work Commission, there will be a cost to this as well. So what do our members do? If they want to tender for that work, they have no choice but to adopt that patent agreement against the wishes of their workers, against the interests of their own company and the way that they work and the productivity and the way and the wishes of employees in their enterprise. And they're forced into an agreement which, for whatever, well, we know why, there's been changes to the law that mean that once you're in an EBA, it's very difficult to terminate it at the end. So you're stuck with it. And that puts that builder in a really insidious position moving forward. A lot of people who do government work, particularly, I suppose, sort of mid-level government work, also do residential work and work in other sectors. So if they get caught by an agreement like this, there's a ramification for them moving forward in the other work that they do. So that is a big problem. The other example I would give you is in relation here to the ACT government in Canberra. They have for a long time maintained what they call a secure local jobs code, and that particular code or policy is a legislative instrument. It contains 19 provisions, 13 of which all require a builder to basically provide additional rights for unions as a condition of being approved to tender for ACT government-funded work. Now, the other element to that is that the group that the ACT government has to oversee the approvals of these agreements and approvals of people who want to tender for work, again, involves people from the CFMEU, who basically have the control and can dictate who gets work, who's eligible to get work and who doesn't. Now, if you want to find an example of how that plays out, and I won't go into any detail for obvious reasons, but there is an independent Corruption Commission inquiry underway in the ACT at the moment called Operation Kingfisher. It's on the public record. I could suggest you have a look at that just to see how that can potentially play out and how that policy is impacting our members. But at the end of the day, all of those things drive up costs of construction artificially and unnecessarily at the expense of productivity.
Mr Schmitke, your organisation was mentioned, name-checked many times yesterday in the Senate in particular, and it's great to see that the government is fighting from your corner. Your submission here speaks a lot about state government procurement policies. What is it that the federal government could do that would fight from your corner?
This might be a utopian comment to make, but if I was the federal government and I was signing the cheques for any dollar that goes to the state governments, I would be making it very clear to them that if you are to accept any money for your state government projects that involves $1 of federal funding, then A, you need to comply with the Commonwealth procurement rules, and 2, those procurement rules need to operate to the complete and utter exclusion of any state procurement rules that might otherwise exist. If the states want to implement those rules that cost their taxpayers and their constituents unnecessary money, be that on them. From the Commonwealth's perspective, if it involves federal taxpayers' money, I think you should use that lever and ensure that you've got the procurement rules in place that suit the Commonwealth as a condition of accepting funding from the Commonwealth. Now, whether that's possible, or I know it sounds easier said than done, but that's the approach I'd be taking. And at the very least, the Commonwealth should move to amend its own procurement rules to say there are certain practices that the states mandate that just shouldn't be acceptable. You shouldn't be forced to do a deal with the CFMEU in order to be eligible to tender for state and federal government funded work, say in Queensland. It's just not appropriate. I wouldn't have thought, given the current context, the current environment involving the CFMEU, that the federal government would want to encourage that or see that taking place or stand by and watch that take place. So that's another change I'd suggest.
Thank you, Mr Schmitke. Senator Grogan.
Thank you. I might just go to labour costs and the various building costs. Mr Reardon, I note you, Ms Martin, that you're seeing a balancing out of the fixed costs. So it's making it easier, or the material costs, so it's making it easier for the fixed price contracts. Is there much evidence of any sort of variable price contracts, which would probably be quite a scary thing for both ends?
It's about an 80-20 split in the long term, so 80% fixed price, 20% variable. The variable are typically a customer that is cashed up and not particularly prepared to take on the risks. So your more higher-end architect-designed projects where costs may be unknown may go to what's called a cost-plus contract, but fixed price is certainly industry standard. There are 3 parties involved in that, the bank, the borrower and the builder. All 3 like the certainty of fixed price contracts.
Makes sense. When we talk about the costs, labour costs, my understanding from the ABS is it's about 18.7% of total costs in construction in 22-23, which was lower than 21-22, like fractionally, and lower again in 2021. But we're hearing that labour costs are exploding, but the data from the ABS doesn't actually take us to that. Is there something under there that maybe would explain the rhetoric versus the data from the ABS?
Yeah, no, nothing lies quite like statistics.
Right? Yeah.
So first up, that's construction.
Yes.
If we separate out detached and apartments from heavy civil,
Well, my understanding is those numbers are actually higher than when you're looking at heavy and civil. It's up to 20.7.
yeah, that would make sense.
And on construction services, it's 25.9.
Cool.
Yeah.
So first of all, I'll quote some other data and then I'll cycle back to those ones. But if we look at skilled trades at the moment, we're looking at an increase at the moment that's much more like CPI than what we've seen at any stage through the past 4 years. So,
And would you say that's a positive thing?
yes,
be
that's a
something you'd
positive.
wanna
Back
be
to more
on your
stable
point of wanting
prices. Yeah.
consistency and stability.
That's right. More stable pricing now in detached home building. I couldn't comment on that. We don't survey the apartment construction side. I couldn't comment on the cost of labour there, but constraints on access to labour are certainly a major constraint on apartment construction at the moment. But on a detached front, the costs have stabilised. Access to labour is still short and prices are rising, just not as fast as what they were, and we track that data through a quarterly survey. The construction data through the ABS you're looking at there, when you look at total cost and the share, we also saw cement and steel increase by 100% through the course of the past few years as well, which exceeded the rate of increase in labour prices. So just quite which metric was increasing the fastest at different times. So we are also, on the data front, just kind of waiting for everything to settle down and ABS data to catch up on that front. But we should track.
Because it's pretty hard with the lag over,
That's
because
it.
obviously COVID's just sent everything into
That's it.
some very uncertain
Yes.
graphing, should we say.
Yep, the roller coaster ride is evident in all of that data. Yes.
But the increased costs in construction, a more lion's share of that is going to materials, or has been going to materials.
It has done. So cement and steel were the two fastest increasing there through the pandemic, given that detached and civil heavy mining were all, and globally then, as governments stimulated building activity, China, India, US, demand for steel, iron ore, cement and the likes increased very significantly. The labour constraints were also intense, but I would have said that the price increases on steel and cement there were at 100% through about the 2001-22 cycle, certainly from a detached perspective. So it would be a rate of change there. Now, at the moment, we're looking at those. Steel has certainly come off and has had a negative price growth over the past 12 months. I can't quite remember the cement price off the top of my head.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schmitke, thank you for your submission. I'll look forward to reading it. I haven't read it yet, obviously. With workforce issues facing the sector, there was some discussion at your appearance earlier, but I'm keen to understand where you see the more recent moves from the government, what your opinion of those are and how you think they might impact, particularly the Building Women's Careers program and the fee-free TAFE, which we've had some discussion about earlier this morning.
Yes, thank you, Senator. They are initiatives that we support. We think that they will deliver positive outcomes for the industry. The issue of having more female participation in the industry is extremely important. We think that that is a big part of addressing our skills shortages moving forward. Master Builders used to run a program called, or still runs a program called Women Building Australia. That is an excellent program because what it does is it allows basic mentoring and effectively a female-led approach to encouraging and supporting new people into our industry. I've watched the person in our office who runs that scheme. We all sit there and observe how there's a positive impact that arises from that in terms of retaining apprentices in the industry. My offsider in the national office is actually a mentor in that program, and they get a lot out of it. So I think it's a great program. My understanding is that the funding for that has been ceased recently, and we're in the process at the moment of looking for further funding to continue that program. The other earlier approaches we've also adopted along those lines is just a general apprentice mentoring scheme, which again hooked up people who've worked in the industry understand it and have been around and experienced, often retired tradespeople with young people in work sites, to basically get them to understand and realise what it's like to work in construction. I think that's a big problem where a lot of people come onto a site fresh out of school as an apprentice. They think it all sounds good, but the reality might not be what they look for, or they're discouraged in the first year or two of their apprenticeship. So having that mentoring scheme was excellent, because I think the completion rates for people under that scheme versus people who weren't, I think it was over 89 or 90% completion rates of the apprenticeship if they're involved in the scheme, but it's far lower rate of completions when people aren't. Yeah.
In terms of the legislation in front of the Parliament that was voted against by my colleagues in the Liberals but also the Greens, so that legislation did not pass last week. What are the challenges you see with that legislation being blocked by the opposition and the Greens?
We want that legislation to pass. I understand that the votes yesterday was against a motion to move standing orders to bring it on for a vote. As
the legislation could have passed yesterday.
Yes, it could have passed, yes.
Yep.
Senator, look...
it did not, because...
And it did not, that's right. So, look,
yep.
we called for it to be passed. We've been calling for it to be passed ever since it was introduced. The industry, as I alluded to earlier, is suffering at the moment. I get reports almost every day, in fact every day, from people within the union movement saying the shredders are operating at full speed, the assets and the money is being moved around all over the place. And the workers in the sector are worried. The employers in the sector are worried. And, of course, the CFMEU, like I said before, are just not relenting in terms of their activity and conduct on the ground. And, in fact, it's getting worse. It is simply a case of people being told, you dare put your head up, if you get involved in this, you back it, you say anything publicly, we'll remember. And they say that because they know that this similar sorts of approaches have been tried in the past and they didn't make any meaningful change. And our members know that too. So why would they put their heads up? So at the moment, everyone's very tense. But I can tell you that the industry needs that certainty. They need to know that they will be able to move forward in a period where they're going to be able to deal with the union in administration or otherwise, which is responsible, lawful and sensible. And that will, I can assure you, open the floodgates in terms of providing lots more information about what's actually been going on in our sector to enable the government to adopt measures that can fix those problems once and for all.
Mr Schmitke, just my point of clarification, if I can, is it the MBA's position that the bill should pass in its current form, unamended, despite the fact that following its release and following its greater scrutiny by people like Senator Cash, but also other industry participants, that there are some necessary and important amendments that should be incorporated into the final bill? Is it the MBA's position that it should pass in its current form, or is there opportunity for it to be improved upon, but in a prudent and expeditious manner, which is, I think, the MBA's position?
Can I just say, Senator Smith, can I say, Senator Smith,
Mr.
because
Schmitke
I did have the call.
Yes, I'm sorry, Senator Grogan does have the call, but
Okay.
Senator Smith...
But it is a good question.
Sorry,
it is a very good question.
We
We might just...
question, as did you earlier.
Yeah, we might just jump to my... Yeah.
So we might just get an answer and then we'll go back
Just
to
for my
Senator
interest,
Grogan.
yeah.
Yes, well, the second position you took us through there, I think, is the correct position. Master Builders, from the get-go, we said that the bill should get support. We understand that there are some issues with the proposed bill, but we've got to remember that the proposed bill creates an ability for the minister to give effect to and create a scheme of administration. Now, I recognise that there needs to be a balance between the government passing this legislation in a way which enables the administrator to do what they need to do, but does it in a way where there's no capacity to, perhaps unduly fetter the powers that would otherwise exist for an independent administrator. So there's that fine balance there, and I appreciate that the government has to reach that balance, and I think the initial version of the bill did that. That said, There are improvements that can be made to the bill. We understand the concerns that have been raised in relation to how it might play out on the ground and the potential for it to be used or misused or perhaps even be, it was described to me the other day, I think, as a Clayton's administration. So we recognise that they're valid.
That's a risk. Yeah.
But at the same time, something is better than nothing. Something is better than nothing.
I think the industry will be getting something.
Yes. So to the extent,
yeah.
whatever the parliament needs to do, frankly, Senator, to get it across the line, we will back whoever says whatever needs to be done.
But given the scale of interference, criminality, etc., it wouldn't be prudent for the parliament to pass a bill that, could in actual fact, create a Clayton's administration or provide backdoor or alternative ways for the system to be gamed by the union. So a prudent and expeditious passage of the bill through the Senate surely would be the MBA's improved position, or a better position today than perhaps at the beginning of the week, when we may not have seen or had a fuller comprehension of what some of the shortcomings of the government's legislation is.
Look, that might be right, Senator. What I would say is this. We have had regard to the Federal Court's filed application for the Fair Work Commission's scheme. That particular document contains far more detail than what's in the bill. I see no reason why the government would not want to replicate a lot of those measures in its own scheme. I just can't see a reason why it would differ from that. And a lot of those measures go to addressing some of the concerns that I understand have been raised and that people hold about the bill in its current form. I think that it would be prudent, not that I'm here to provide advice to any government, but I think it would be prudent for the government to perhaps indicate to the opposition what the actual terms of that deed might, or that scheme might look like, in order to potentially satisfy some of those concerns. And to the extent that those concerns can also be accommodated in the legislation, they should be accommodated. But again, I go back to an earlier point. This scheme and the administration process is not the be-all and end-all here. This is the starting point for longer-term reform in the industry. So if this is, if there's some potential problems with it, put it in place, get it through, because that's better than nothing. The next steps are better protections for our industry and their companies, but also a range of meaningful, lasting, tangible change and broader law reform, which will make sure that the problems that we see right now have existed for decades don't come back. And it would also mean that the concerns that might exist ordinarily about a road union and how they might gain the system and how they might come back, put those other changes in place and those particular issues fall away.
Senator Grogan, your time continues.
Thank you. Sorry that you've been stuck in the middle of this batting backwards and forwards, Mr Schmitke. But just to be clear, there are a series of amendments that have been put to the Senate, or that are waiting to be put to the Senate, from all parties, and those negotiations are ongoing. But if we're blocked from debating the bill, obviously we can't pass it, and we can't debate those amendments to ensure that the bill does what it's intended to do. And I appreciate your comments earlier about the fact that having good, solid unions working well within industries, protecting workers, is a valuable, very, very valuable asset for our country. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr Schmitke and Ms Martin, would the Fair Work bill that's before us at the moment in the Senate have been necessary if the Australian Building and Construction Commission had remained in existence?
I'll answer that question first. Senator, thank you. I have to say to you that as somebody who's read all the Royal Commission reports, and as somebody who's now been involved in industrial relations policy and the building construction industry in various forms for 19 years and 8 years now at MBA, there's a lot of finger pointing we can do. There's a lot of blame game that we can play. I'm at a point, the industry's at a point, more importantly, where it is telling us the time for that's passed. What we now need to do is focus on what we need to do to fix it moving forward. So I don't necessarily think that any answer I can give to that question would add any value or be in the interest of our members here. We are looking forward and making sure that for the future we get better outcomes for our industry. This is an opportunity to move forward, to recognise the goodwill that's in the parliament, to recognise that both sides of the parliament yesterday were standing up, all effectively talking about the same problems in the industry. Let's now find a way where we can take that spirit and use it to drive meaningful change for the future. I don't think there's too much value in looking backwards.
How is, I'll come to Ms Martin on these same matters, how is the Construction Industry Compliance and Corruption Agency, which is advocated by the MBA as a new body, different from the Australian Building Construction Commission?
Significantly different. First of all, it would be an agency that has a broader role to enforce a broader range of industry-specific powers, which are not simply workplace relations. It would have a role in relation to competition law. It would have a role in relation to things like governance regarding changes to the Corporations Act that you might want to make specific for our industry. It would have a role in relation to greater compliance in relation to things like financial transparency and governance of things like worker entitlement funds. And it would also be underpinned by effectively a standing police unit. I would envisage that to be a joint arrangement with the states and the Commonwealth, but it would be a standing unit so that you have one-stop, one-shop regulator that can oversee and enforce with strong compliance powers a range of changes to industry-specific laws, but do it in such a way which is coordinated and comprehensive and with a regulator that knows where to look. So at the moment, for example, you could say, well, we have the ACCC and they need to go and investigate particular concerns in the construction. Well, I'm not necessarily confident that they, A, have the tools to get to what they need to do, and B, that they know where to look in terms of what they need to look for in our sector, because it is different. This is the key findings of all these royal commissions. They all say building and construction is a unique and different industry. What affects our industry and the problems we have don't exist in other sectors, and the laws that we have that might work in other sectors don't work in building and construction. That's why we're advocating for specific change to those laws, to give the regulators the powers and the tools they need to get to where the problems are, and to better share information, so that if you see a safety breach or alleged safety breach on site and some sort of disruption, it may well be because somebody is trying to coerce an employer into signing an enterprise agreement. So that means that that's referable off to the IR division within that particular agency. It could also be that there's an allegation there of intimidation or corruption. That could be referred off to the criminal element of an agency like that. That particular conduct might also represent a breach of competition laws, or it could involve a financial transaction that might be involve payments to a particular training fund or workplace service provider, which again is perhaps involving payments which are being used for nefarious purposes. Again, that can be picked up and identified. But having it under the one regulator we think is important because that way they will know where to look. They've got the powers and to enforce the law, and they've got the power to do it in a way which effectively removes all of the existing causes of the culture that drives that corruption and criminality.
So is the kicker, the CICCA, completely different from the ABCC, or is it an improved and more enhanced ABCC?
It is an improved and more enhanced one, underpinned by strong law enforcement with the capacity to enforce a range of additional changes to the law that would be industry specific to building and construction. And it's an important point I just want to make as well. I think one of the reasons why in the past government's attempts to put in place changes following these royal commissions, I think the reason why often it falls over is that my reading of those reports confirms that not at one point in time no one has ever actually implemented all of the recommendations for change that those reports made. There's only ever been a piecemeal approach, and to the extent that it has been implemented, it's been done by different departments, different agencies, different regulators, often with competing priorities and often without the expertise to know exactly what they're doing. So that's, I think, a key lesson that we can learn. It also demonstrates that, for example, the Hayden Royal Commission made a range of changes to recommendations to change the competition law. I think one of the key reasons why they haven't been adopted is because if you adopted those broadly across the economy, there could be unintended consequences for other sectors, which we don't want. Hence, I think that there are a range of changes to industry, to competition law that could be ring-fenced to building and construction that would help our sector but wouldn't necessarily deliver adverse outcomes for other sectors. Likewise, with things like changes to safety law, to industrial relations law, to the training funds, workplace service providers and the governance, the regulation of worker entitlement funds, all of these things can be ring-fenced to building and construction. The other example, of course, is the Ensuring Integrity Bill that the former government, sought to implement as, again, a result of Hayden Royal Commission. Now, the recommendations from Hayden regarding the Ensuring Integrity Bill clearly were aimed at the CFMEU. But of course, in order to implement them, it had to go wider. And as a result, it picked up a lot of organisations who are good, decent unions that didn't frankly deserve to be captured by that legislation, which we, I think, all acknowledge now. Again, ring-fence it to building and construction, target it to where the problems are. That way you don't have to disturb other parts of the economy where there isn't a problem that needs to be fixed. That's a key part of this proposal as well.
Thank you very much. Ms Martin, would you like to make any comments or observations on those 2 points?
I guess the first thing I would say is that whilst we tend to think that this is a sort of big end of town issue, it isn't. You know, our members, as residential builders, are diversifying into taking on small government projects, including the renovation of schools and police stations, and they are missing out on and putting in very worthwhile competitive bids that are missing out because they won't sign up to an EBA. And they know that because it's a small community of people who go for those jobs and they all share notes. The other thing is that there are stories amongst our members, well, not stories, there is evidence amongst our members of being required to use specific labour hire companies, being required to use a specific company to conduct a welcome to country ceremony. It's not just the EBA that they have to have, it's the EBA so that their subcontractors then have to have, so it filters down that way. And as Shaun said, it also filters into other parts of their business which wouldn't otherwise be subject to an EBA. So it is It is more widespread than that. It infiltrates into the training system with mandated courses like the Silica Awareness course here, which just happens to be only operated by the CFMEU's related business. So there are lots of other ways that it contributes to the additional cost. In terms of what's happening this week, we share the MBA's desire to move everything along as quickly as possible. However, my view is that the reason we're here in the first place is not because there are bad guys, but because the bad guys have found us. And that's because because we have created an environment through lack of regulation, lack of protection, lack of proper legislation to actually enable the opportunities to arise. There's a severe, and Shaun mentioned this, the culture of fear amongst our builders of not being able to raise issues. Some of the Fair Work Commission requests for information and evidence, they're not going to yield much because people won't say anything, and they won't go through putting their name into a website because they're not just afraid, they're actually aware that they probably, feel at least that they won't get more work in the future. So, whilst it does have to be right, the nature of the industry at the moment, the uncertainty around the industry in general, the sentiment from the consumer, all those things and what they read in the papers, it just impacts completely. So we just need to get on with it.
So, but Mrs. Martin, you would agree that strong whistle, given what you've just said about the importance of people being able to share information, try to find a way to operate free of that fear, or fear of
Reprisal.
reprisals.
Yeah.
So you would agree surely that the Housing Industry Association would agree surely that strong whistleblower protections need to be part of any regime,
They do.
and if the Senate has before it a bill to create a new regime, that regime should have strong whistleblower protections.
Agree.
Mr Schmitke, would you agree with that?
Well, Senator, let me just say this. The bill at the moment is for a specific purpose and it makes specific amendments to the Registered Organisations Act. There are already existing protections under that Act and a range of other legislation which provides protection to whistleblowers of various types, but it applies to individual employees. It doesn't apply to companies, and it doesn't prevent those companies being the subject of a concerted future attack as a result of giving that information.
So the whistleblower protections are not strong enough?
For companies, there is no protection for them in the future from suffering consequences, reprisal or adverse action as a result of being involved in this. There are protections for individuals who want to give evidence. Those protections generally exist in relation to things like they're protecting their workplace rights or protection from adverse action.
Schmitke, I think we're talking about the strength of protections for whistleblowers. The Housing Industry Association has just made it very clear that they think if a new regime is before the Senate, this should be an opportunity for strong or stronger whistleblower protections. My question to the Master Builders Association is, are the whistleblowers' protections strong enough as they currently exist in your view, or could they be strengthened?
They could be strengthened. I don't necessarily think that the current bill is the appropriate mechanism to achieve those stronger protections. I think that there needs to be consideration of a different approach, which does take account of the company's interests. I have some very strong views about how that can be achieved. We have provided information and suggestions to government about how it could be achieved. In order to give companies that stronger protection, I think you need to look broader than the Fair Work Registered Organisations law. You need to look at things like corporations law and areas like that.
Thank you.
May I just make a clarification? We've used words today around the word reprisal. When you are talking about reprisals and the actions of a union against the building industry, are you talking about economic reprisals, something that will affect their business and the viability of their business, or are you talking about individual reprisals on individuals, not dissimilar to the ones that we saw during that documentary, the 60 Minutes that the journalist Mackenzie did? Are people frightened of physical reprisals or personal reprisals?
Both is the answer to the question. I think from a company's perspective, that's the real big concern. A company that operates in our industry knows that even through what would appear to be the sort of use of existing lawful rights as a union, you can, because of the nature of our industry, create massive damage to building and construction companies. We have a range of commercial and contractual pressures which make us very susceptible to any delay or disruption on site. We all know this. The problem we have is that the industry is one in which the CFMEU historically has had a very long memory. I can tell you that there are a range of contractors here in the ACT who gave evidence in the Hayden Royal Commission. To the extent that those companies still remain, they are still the targets of reprisals and all sorts of conduct from the CFMEU, whether it be preventing them from getting work, disrupting and delaying and targeting their suppliers, disrupting and delaying any site that they're particularly working on, or even, as I said earlier, have a look at Operation Kingfisher to see exactly how that is now playing out. There are significant reprisals that affect the commercial viability of these companies. This evidence that they gave was a long time ago. It's still happening today. And we need to give the industry that protection so that they know if they speak out now, if there's an adverse consequence in the future, that there is some action they can take, or somebody can take an action on their behalf to stop that and to seek an appropriate amount of damage or compensation in the event that a commercial loss has been suffered.
Thank you. Does housing industry have anything more to add to that?
No, I do. I guess I just want to take up on the point that this is a first step that we're talking about with this, and that, we can't lose sight of that there's more to be done.
Thank you. Thank you very much for...
Just ask one quick
absolutely.
So, I appreciate all the comments regarding your opinions on the legislation. As I mentioned earlier, there's a suite of amendments that have been put through that, to find their way either in or out of the legislation, need to be debated in the chamber. Would you encourage my colleagues to allow that debate to occur within the Senate, to allow the legislation to progress and those amendments to be debated?
Well, if Senator Grogan is arguing
I'm not
for a
asking
full and wholesome
your-
committee
I'm not
of the
asking
whole
you, Senator
stage to
Smith.
the bill, I can't see why the opposition would oppose that. But that's not what the proposition that was before the Senate yesterday. You wanted to guillotine the bill. You wanted just 30 minutes of discussion around amendments.
And you want none?
No, that's not true.
Chair, I wonder if it's your role to maintain order and move on.
Yes, I'm quite happy
think
to
we're
call
ready
this
to move
session
on.
to a close, if you like, and let you off the hook. Thank you very much.
No,
for
Senator Smith and I
report.
just will not agree, and I think it's probably not great for us to have that conversation here. We've all been arguing about it for days now, days and days.
So I'll let you go and we'll move on with the agenda. Thank you very much for appearing before the committee today. Can I ask if you took any questions on notice, that we would appreciate answers by close of business on the 6th of September. Thank you.